From the personal Narthexium log of Apothecary Corvin Mael, Blood Angels, 4th Company. Entry dated, Day 19 of Void Isolation. Ship's timestamp, 003.M42. I extracted Castiel's gene seed this morning. He died at the 3rd bell. The rage took him quietly, which is its own mercy, I suppose. The progenoid was intact, both of them. I held the primary in my palm for longer than procedure requires, and I found myself thinking. And I am recording this because I record everything. Because precision is the only honesty left to me. I found myself thinking that it was the most beautiful thing I had ever held. That is not a clinical observation, I know that. A gene seed is not beautiful. It is a biological material. Sacred biological material, yes. It is the living echo of Sanguinius himself, encoded in protein and cellular memory, and I have given 31 years to its preservation. But beautiful is not a word I have used in this log before. I held it in my palm, and the apothecarian was quiet, and Castiel was on the table with his eyes still open. And I thought, beautiful. I don't know what that means. I'm recording it because I recorded everything. Understand something about the Sanguis Eternal before we go further. She was not a dying ship. Not yet. Her reactors burned clean, her void shields held. Her crew of 200 Blood Angels moved through her corridors, with the disciplined efficiency of men who had been trained since adolescence to function in crisis. From the outside, if anything in the void was watching, which nothing should have been, which nothing had any reason to be, she would have looked exactly what she was. A strike cruiser running silent, conserving fuel, waiting for a window in the warp to make for Baal. From the inside, she felt like a held breath. The Tyranid ambush had come 40 days ago, in the space between stars where nothing should have been waiting. 3 bioships, tendril class, emerging from what the navigators later described as a pocket of absolute warp silence. The kind of silence that is not peaceful, but predatory. The kind that means something has eaten the noise. The engagement lasted 11 hours. The Sanguis Eternal won, in the sense that she survived. She lost 43 battle brothers, her primary Geller field emitter, and something harder to name. A quality of safety, of predictability, of the universe behaving according to known rules. The bioships were destroyed. Their wreckage drifted. Some of it drifted close enough to the hull that boarding parties had to be sent to push the larger sections clear before they compromised the void shields. Those boarding parties came back covered in something. Standard decontamination. Standard biohazard protocols. Standard clearance from the ship's apothecary, from Corvin, that the biological residue posed no lasting threat to crew health. He had been thorough. He had documented everything. He had collected samples because that was standard xenological procedure, because the Imperium needed data on Tyranid biology, because knowledge was a weapon and an apothecary's duty extended beyond his own ship to the wider war. He had sealed the samples in his personal research locker and filed the appropriate reports and administered clearance and thought nothing more of it. That was what he told himself. That was true. He had not thought about the samples in 3 weeks. That was also true. He thought about them sometimes, late in the night cycle, in the particular quality of silence that falls in an apothecarian when the patients are sleeping, and the only sound is the hum of preservation canisters. But thinking about them was not the same as thinking about them in a way that mattered. It was just the mind cataloging its inventory. It meant nothing. He had not opened the locker once since the decontamination. That was true as well. The acceleration began on day 6. Before the ambush, the Sanguis Eternal's rate of Black Rage episodes had been consistent with long deployment averages. 2, perhaps 3 brothers per month showing the first signs, the haunted quality in the eyes, The moments of dissociation where they stopped mid-sentence and stared at something only they could see. Corvin had managed it, as he had always managed it. The chaplains administered the death company rites. The brothers were given their red and black, their place among the honored damned, and they died well in the fighting that followed, as blood angels do. On day 6 of the void isolation, 4 brothers fell to the rage in a single day. Corvin had never seen 4 in a single day. He documented it. He cross-referenced it against every piece of medical literature available in the ship's data core. Sparse, given that Blood Angel's medical texts were closely guarded, but sufficient for his purposes. He found nothing that matched. Prolonged warp exposure had been theorized as a potential stressor on the Flaw, but theoretical was not the same as observed, and no theorist had proposed a mechanism by which exposure could quadruple the rate of onset inside a 6-day window. He formed a hypothesis. He recorded it in his log with careful, neutral language. Working theory: compromised Geller field emitter, creating elevated warp resonance in ship environment. Flaw-related genetic instability potentially exacerbated by proximity to immaterium without full shielding. Recommend priority repair of primary emitter. Request filed with Tech Marine Herath. Awaiting response. The Tech Marine's response came 6 hours later. The repair would require parts they did not have. The secondary emitter would hold. The secondary emitter was holding. There was nothing to be done until they reached Baal. Corvin read the response and filed it, and went to perform the evening examination of his charges, and said nothing to anyone about the number that was living behind his sternum like a coal. 4 in one day. Day 6 through day 40, and the toll was 31. 31 brothers, out of 200. He knew this number the way he knew his own heartbeat, not by counting, but by constant involuntary awareness. It was with him when he slept, and when he worked, and when he stood in the apothecarian holding Castiel's gene seed and thought, for reasons he did not examine, that it was beautiful. 31 brothers in 34 days. Entry, day 23. Brother Sergeant Aldrich recovered from his episode at 0400 this morning. I was present for the full duration, approximately 6 hours from onset to resolution. The episode presented with standard Black Rage symptomatic profile in its initial phase: dissociative ideation, temporal displacement, physical hyperarousal, the typical vocalizations. He was calling for Sanguinius. They always call for Sanguinius. What I am recording here is the recovery. Standard recovery from a non-fatal Black Rage episode, in the rare cases where the brother does not continue to deteriorate, takes between 18 and 36 hours. Aldrich was lucid at the 6-hour mark, fully lucid, not the partial clarity that sometimes precedes relapse, but complete, oriented, appropriate. He knew his name, he knew the ship. He asked me what time it was. I have reviewed all available records. The fastest documented recovery from a full Black Rage episode is 11 hours. There are 3 such cases in the Blood Angels medical archive. All 3 were regarded as exceptional. Aldrich's recovery is 46 minutes short of half that record. He was also unable to account for approximately 2 hours of his experience during the episode. Not the dissociative period, which is expected, but a specific 2-hour window in the middle of the episode's course during which his vital signs, which I was monitoring continuously, showed a sudden and complete normalization. Heart rate, respiratory rate, cortisol levels, all returned to baseline. For 2 hours, in the middle of a Black Rage episode, Brother Aldrich's body was behaving as though nothing was wrong. Then the episode resumed, ran its course, and terminated 6 hours after onset. I have no framework for this. I am recording it as an anomaly and will continue to monitor. I have not told the chaplains about the 2-hour window. It does not seem relevant to their duties. I will determine relevance once I have more data. Corvin was 47 years in service, which for a space marine meant he looked perhaps 35 in the way that mattered. The bone structure, the stillness, the quality of weight in his movements that young men do not have and cannot fabricate. His armor was white because he was an apothecary, and he had worn white for 31 years, and in that time the white had meant many things. It had meant safety to the brothers who saw him crossing a battlefield. It meant precision, competence, the particular authority that comes from being the only person in a room who knows what to do with a wound. Lately it had begun to feel like it meant something else, something he had not chosen. He slept 4 hours in every 24, when he slept at all, which was not every cycle. His apothecarian occupied a section of Deck 5, between the ship's main surgical theater and a storage bay that had been converted to additional recovery space when the episode rate climbed past what the standard facility could manage. He had 12 recovery bays now. He had not expected to need 12. He had not expected to need 8. 7 of the 12 were currently occupied. He moved between them in the night cycle with the particular economy of a man who has learned not to spend himself on the distances between tasks, only on the tasks themselves. He checked fluid levels and vital signs, and the readings on the preservation canisters mounted along the apothecarian's primary wall. 47 canisters now, each one holding a progenoid extracted from a fallen brother, each one labeled in Corvin's careful script with a name and a date and a batch number. He stopped at the 47th canister, Castiel's. He had hung it that morning, after the extraction, after the moment with the gene seed in his palm that he had recorded and then not thought about again. He checked the seal. He checked the atmospheric reading inside the unit. He checked the temperature. Everything was within parameters. Everything was exactly as it should be. He stood there for longer than the check required. There was a quality to the gene seed inside the canister that his eyes kept returning to without his permission. A quality of color that he could not name precisely and could not dismiss. He had extracted thousands of progenoids in his career. He knew their color in the way a painter knows certain pigments, not by description, but by the body's instinctive recognition of rightness. Gene seed was a particular shade, a particular quality of biological matter that his hands and eyes had catalogued to such depth that deviation registered before thought did. Castiel's gene seed was the right color. Almost. It was almost the right color. He stood in front of the canister for 3 minutes. He checked the chrono afterward, because he checked everything, and tried to articulate to himself what was wrong with almost, and could not. The difference was smaller than the word small could contain. It was the difference between a tone and its shadow. It was the kind of thing that meant nothing. It was the kind of thing that, if he mentioned it to another apothecary, they would examine the sample and find nothing, and he would feel embarrassed by his own fatigue and imprecision. He recorded nothing about the color in his log. He made a note to monitor the canister. Entry, day 40. The acceleration has stopped. I don't know why. I should feel relieved. I don't. He wrote the entry at 2,200 ship's time, and then sat at his desk for a moment, and then went back to the apothecarian, because he had not slept in 31 hours, and the best available substitute for sleep, in his experience, was the specific variety of quiet that existed only in a room full of equipment, doing its work without requiring anything of you. The lights were on their night setting, low, amber, the color of something almost warm. His 12 bays breathed their slow rhythms. The monitors traced their patient lines. He stood in front of the preservation wall. 47 canisters, 47 names, 47 brothers who had given him their most sacred material and trusted him to carry it home to Baal, to the great repositories where the chapter's genetic legacy was preserved across the centuries. where Sanguinius himself persisted in some molecular, unkillable way in the inheritance he had left his sons. Corvin looked at canister 47. He looked at it for a long time, and then he saw it. Not the color this time, not the quality he had spent 3 minutes failing to name, but something else. Something that required no interpretation, no expertise, no knowledge beyond the basic fact of what gene seed was and was not. Gene seed, suspended in preservative fluid in a sealed atmospheric canister, does not move. There is no mechanism by which it moves. It floats in a fixed medium in a controlled environment. There is no current, no disturbance, no biological process that would cause motion after extraction. After extraction, gene seed is inert. This is fundamental. This is not the kind of thing that has exceptions. Canister 47 was moving. Not much. The movement was smaller than the color difference had been. Smaller than almost anything he had a word for. A slow rotation, barely perceptible, like something settling into a new position. Like something turning, with great patience and great deliberateness, to face him. Corvin stood in the amber light of his apothecarian and watched the gene seed of Brother Castiel turn in its sealed canister, and he did not move, and he did not record this in his log, and he did not look away. Chapter 2. What the Hive Remembers. They brought Brother Tyranid in at 0340, and Corvin heard them coming from 2 corridors away. Not because of the noise. That was the thing that pulled him upright from his desk, before he understood why. The quality of the sound, wrong in a way his body registered before his mind did. A Black Rage episode in transit sounded like particular things. Impact, struggle, the rhythmic crack of a trank pole against ceramite, the hoarse liturgical shouting of a brother lost 38 centuries in the past, fighting a battle that ended before this ship was built. It sounded like violence that did not know it was violence, like grief that had forgotten it was grief and became instead a force of nature wearing a man's shape. This did not sound like that. There was a trank pole. He could hear it, the metallic percussion of 2 brothers, keeping a third contained in the corridor. There was physical struggle, but underneath it, between the impacts, where the shouting should have been, there was a voice, measured, unhurried, speaking in complete sentences. Corvin was through the apothecarian door before the escort reached it. Tyranid was a devastator, broad even by the standards of his brotherhood, and it had taken 4 brothers to bring him down the corridor. 2 had bloody noses. 1 was walking with the careful deliberateness of a man managing a cracked rib and refusing to acknowledge it. The 4th, Brother Samael, who had served alongside Tyranid for 11 years, and whose expression now was something Corvin did not have a clinical word for, held the rear and would not look at the man he was restraining. Tyranid himself was not fighting. Not anymore. He was walking mostly, though walking in the way that suggested the restraints were still necessary. A contained energy. A sense of something held back, not by the physical bonds, but by a decision, moment to moment, to remain contained. His eyes were open. His eyes were the first thing Corvin checked. Always. And Tyranid's eyes were tracking. Present. Focused. With a quality that was almost attentive. Almost curious. As though the corridor and the brothers around him and the ship itself were objects of interest rather than context. He was still speaking when they came through the door. The central cortex is the largest single organ, larger than you would expect. You think of them as bodies, but the body is secondary. The body is transport. The body is expendable. The cortex is what persists. When you destroyed the ships, you thought you were destroying something, but you were only destroying the transport. The cortex distributed before impact. The cortex is patient. The cortex does not need a body to. Bay 1, Corvin said. His voice came out level. He was proud of that. They got Tyranid into the bay and into the restraints, which he accepted with cooperative indifference, as though the question of whether he was restrained was not a question that concerned the part of him currently in use. Corvin sent the escort out. He sent Samael out last, and Samael went with the reluctance of a man abandoning something, but he went. The bay door is sealed. Tyranid turned his head and looked at Corvin. The quality of the look was wrong in the same way the sound had been wrong. Too present, too specific, too much like the gaze of something that had been watching him for a while and had simply chosen now to let him know. "You already know what I am," Tyranid said. "You made me." Corvin pulled a stool to the bedside because standing felt suddenly like a performance he did not have the resources for. He sat down. He folded his hands. He looked at Tyranid with the steady, neutral attention he had spent 31 years cultivating. The expression that said, "I have seen everything. Nothing you show me will be more than I can hold. Tell me what you're experiencing," Corvin said. Tyranid smiled, not unkindly. "You have symptoms. You want a clinical presentation you can write down and file under a heading you already have. I want to understand what's happening to you. You understand more than you are currently willing to admit." Tyranid's voice was perfectly even, which was its own form of wrongness. A devastator's voice, accustomed to the roar of heavy weapons and the chaos of combat, had a particular timbre even in quiet, a resonance built from years of noise. This was not that voice. This was something using Tyranid's vocal cords, with the careful precision of someone operating unfamiliar equipment. "But I'll give you your symptoms if it helps. I can see the ship's entire infrastructure when I close my eyes. Every corridor, every bulkhead, every junction. I can feel where the brothers are, not their locations, not that precisely, but their weight, the difference between them. I have been able to do this since day 23. Day 23. Corvin's hands, folded on his knee, did not move. "What else?" "I haven't been hungry in 8 days. I don't think I will be hungry again. The process I'm running doesn't require nutrition the way—" Tyranid paused, tilted his head slightly, like a man listening to something. "The way the previous process did. The previous process, not my body, not me. The previous process." "Tyranid," Corvin kept his voice level, "I need you to tell me about the bioships." "I've been telling you about the bioships. You were talking about the cortex, the central cortex. How do you know about the architecture of a Tyranid bioship?" Tyranid looked at him for a moment with those attentive, present eyes. "What do you think?" The bay was quiet. The monitors traced Tyranid's vital signs in their patient lines. Heart rate elevated but not catastrophically. Cortisol elevated but not at black rage levels. Neurological activity showing a pattern that Corvin had never seen before. A pattern that looked almost like two separate brains operating in loose synchrony, each one completing what the other left unfinished. "The cortex distributed," Corvin said. He heard himself say it from a slight distance. "Before impact. Yes, the distribution was extremely fine. Below the threshold your decontamination protocols were calibrated to detect. Below the threshold, most detection equipment would find meaningful." The slight emphasis on most sat in the air between them. "We have been very patient." "We." Corvin wrote nothing down. He had his recorder active. He always had his recorder active. But he was not writing anything down, because writing things down meant deciding what category they belonged to, and he did not have a category for us. "The Black Rage," he said. "You haven't had an episode?" "No." "The others who recovered quickly? Aldrich, Farron, Usil." He was listing them because listing was a thing he knew how to do. "They received—" He stopped. "They received gene seed maintenance on day 18. Standard procedure after the engagement. He had been thorough. He had been meticulous. He had used the new preservation stock, the batch he had prepared with enhanced protocols, the batch that had been prepared in the same workspace where he kept the samples he had not opened. The contamination would have been airborne. Trace. Below the threshold, his own equipment would have flagged as meaningful. He sat very still. "You're starting to understand," Tyranid said, not unkindly, with something that sounded horribly like patience. "I need you to stop talking," Corvin said. Tyranid stopped talking. He lasted 4 more hours. Not in agony. That was the thing Corvin kept returning to afterward. In the specific way you return to a wound, not because it helps, but because the mind cannot leave it alone. Tyranid did not die in agony. His vital signs declined with a steadiness that looked almost voluntary, a managed withdrawal rather than a failure. And at the end he was quiet, and his eyes were open, and whatever had been using his voice had apparently concluded its business and departed, and what was left was just Tyranid, just the brother, returned to himself for whatever time remained, which was not much. Corvin stayed with him. He did not call the chaplains until it was over. He told himself it was because there was no time, which was not true. He told himself Tyranid would not have wanted the rites, which he did not know. He stayed because leaving felt like something he could not afford to do, and he administered what comfort he could. And at 0811, the monitors went flat, and he turned them off and sat in the silence for a long time. Then he went to his desk and opened his log. Entry, Day 41. Brother Tyranid died this morning at 0811, following what I am classifying as a complex neurological event with black rage adjacent presentation. The episode was atypical in several respects, primarily the preservation of linguistic function throughout. I have secured a full recording for analysis. The content of his speech during the episode was consistent with xenological detail, potentially absorbed during the boarding action engagement. Trauma-associated confabulation is a known, if rare, feature of black rage presentations, and I believe this accounts for the apparent specificity. The episode resolved fatally, which is unusual for a first presentation, but not without precedent in cases of particularly acute onset. I am increasing monitoring across all current patients. I am also cross-referencing recovery timelines against gene seed maintenance records to determine whether any correlation exists between recent procedures and episode severity. I believe this was an isolated event. I am recording that belief while acknowledging it is a belief rather than a conclusion. The data will tell me if I am wrong. He spent 6 hours on the cross-reference. He should not have spent 6 hours on it. It was not a complicated analysis. He had the records, he had the timeline. The correlation either existed or it did not, and the arithmetic involved was straightforward. He spent 6 hours on it because he ran it 4 times, and each time the result came back the same, he found a reason to run it again. The 7th time he got the same result, he stopped. 7 brothers had shown atypical black rage recovery profiles since day 18. 7 brothers with recovery times below the historical average, with the 2-hour normalization window he had first documented in Aldrich, with the quality of preternatural calm that Corvin had been recording as promising data without asking himself what the data was promising. 7 brothers. All 7 had received gene seed maintenance on day 18 or day 19. All 7 had received stock from the same batch. He sat with this for a long time. He sat with the knowledge that the batch had been prepared in the same workspace as the samples, and that he had not opened the samples, and that airborne contamination at trace concentrations was a theoretical possibility that he had not tested for, because he had not thought to test for it, because he had not imagined there was anything to test for, because the samples were sealed, and he had not opened them. He had not opened them. He opened his log. Entry: Day 41, Supplemental. Cross-reference complete. 7 brothers with atypical recovery profiles all received maintenance from Batch 7, Day 18. The correlation is statistically significant, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. I am not yet able to determine causation. Correlation is not causation. It is possible the batch contained a preparation variance that is interacting with the Flaw in an unexpected but not necessarily harmful way. The accelerated recovery profile, if genuine, would represent a significant improvement in outcome for affected brothers. I need more data before I can characterize this as positive or negative. I am flagging Batch 7 for continued monitoring. I am not withdrawing it from use pending further analysis, as the evidence for harm is currently insufficient to justify the disruption. I am cautiously optimistic. Tyranid's case remains anomalous, and I am treating it as such. He read the entry back once. Then he filed it and went to prepare for the evening examination. He did not think about the word "we." He did not think about the previous process. He did not think about the 7 brothers whose names he had written in a column, one below the other. In the cramped handwriting of a man doing arithmetic, he wanted to finish quickly. He thought about his rounds. He thought about the monitoring adjustments he needed to make. He thought about Tyranid's vital signs in their final hour, the managed quality of that decline, the sense of something concluding a task. He had 11 bays occupied now, 12 briefly, but Tyranid had freed up one. He moved through them with his usual economy, checking, adjusting, noting. The brothers in his care slept or rested or stared at the ceiling with the particular inward focus of men managing pain they did not discuss. Some of them nodded when he approached. Some of them did not. Brother Aldrich in Bay 4 watched him cross the room with an expression that Corvin could not read, and that he therefore did not try to read, because the evening examination required focus, and he could not afford to spend attention on things that were not on the checklist. He reached the preservation wall last, as he always did. 47 canisters. He had not added to them overnight. He had hoped not to add to them tonight. He stood in front of them and did his count, as he always did. And then he stood there a moment longer than the count required, because he was tired, and the amber light was almost warm, and this room was the closest thing to quiet he had found in 41 days. His eye went, without his permission, to canister 47. It had stopped moving. He had checked 3 times since the night he had watched it turn, and each time it had been still, and he had each time decided that he had been exhausted and imprecise, and that stillness confirmed the obvious truth that he had imagined the movement, and that was the end of it. It was still now. He let out a breath. Slow, careful, the kind that was not quite relief, but was performing the function of relief would have served. He turned to go. He had one more task, a routine extraction, Brother Fennis, fallen this morning. The narthecium already prepped and waiting on the surgical tray. Fennis was on the table with the respect Corvin always accorded to the dead, arms positioned, eyes closed, the small ceremony of arrangement that 31 years had made automatic. Corvin worked efficiently, because efficiency was what you gave the dead when tenderness was too slow. He positioned the narthecium. He engaged in the extraction sequence. The device met resistance. He adjusted the angle. Standard procedure when adhesion was higher than normal. It happened, particularly in brothers with elevated cortisol at time of death, a physiological response that slightly altered tissue density. He increased the extraction pressure by 15%, which was within protocol, and the narthecium labored for a moment, and then the progenoid was released. Corvin held it up to the light. He had been an apothecary for 31 years. He had held thousands of gene seed progenoids. He knew their weight and their color and their texture and their smell and the specific quality of their surfaces, which were always smooth. Because gene seed was biological material, but it was also something close to crystalline in its precision, its cellular structure so densely ordered that it had no room for irregularity. Growing for weeks with great patience, and growing for weeks with great patience and great purpose, were threads, fine as spider silk, dense as cable, branching in the ordered architectural pattern of a thing that knew where it was going. Tyranid neural fiber, not on the surface, not contaminating the exterior in the way a foreign substance would sit against a host. Inside it, woven through it. The fiber and the gene seed had grown together in some process that had no word in any medical literature Corvin possessed. The boundary between them dissolved. The architecture of one incorporated into the architecture of the other, purposeful, integrated, complete. He held it in the light for a long time. The apothecarian was quiet. The monitors breathed. Somewhere in Bay 4, Brother Aldrich, who had recovered in 6 hours from a Black Rage episode, who had a 2-hour window in his record that Corvin had logged as anomalous, who was one of 7 names in a column that Corvin was not thinking about. Brother Aldrich turned over in his sleep. Corvin lowered the progenoid. He walked to the preservation wall. He opened a new canister, canister 48, label not yet written, Brother Fennis's name not yet on it. He placed the progenoid inside. He sealed the canister. He hung it on the rack beside the others. He went to his desk. He opened his log. He recorded the extraction time, the progenoid weight, the atmospheric seal reading of the new canister. He closed the log. He did not write down what he had seen. Chapter 3. The Penance Rite. Entry, Day 43. I have decided to tell no one. This is not cowardice. A panicked crew cannot function. I have watched what fear does to men who are already at the edge of what they can bear, and I will not be the instrument of that unraveling. The brothers in my care need stability. They need to believe that their apothecary has the situation in hand, because an apothecary who does not have the situation in hand is not an apothecary. He is another problem, and this ship does not need another problem. I am the only one aboard who understands the mechanism. I am therefore the only one who can reverse it. This is not arrogance. This is an accurate assessment of the available resources. The chaplains cannot help me. Tech Marine Herath cannot help me. Captain Vorlan cannot help me. And if I brought this to him now, before I understand it, before I have anything to offer beyond the problem itself, I would be handing him a catastrophe with no solution attached. And that is not something I am willing to do. I am the apothecary. The gene seed is my responsibility. The flaw is my responsibility. If I have introduced a contaminant into the chapter's genetic legacy, then the correction of that contaminant is also my responsibility, and I will discharge that responsibility before I involve anyone else. This is logic. This is my duty. This is what Sanguinius would have asked of me. Read that entry carefully. Read the shape of it, the way each sentence arrives pre-defended, armored against an objection that has not yet been raised. The way the logic assembles itself with such visible effort, each piece placed with the deliberateness of a man building a wall. He knows somewhere below the level of words will not hold. Corvin was a precise man. His earlier entries are the entries of someone who trusts his own thinking. Direct, spare, the record of a mind that does not need to convince itself because it is not in doubt. This entry is different. This entry is an argument, and the only person he is arguing with is himself. He filed it at 0200, ship's time. Then he went to work. The research locker was in the far corner of his private lab, behind the secondary surgical station, behind a rack of equipment he had positioned without fully acknowledging he was positioning it as a barrier. A frosted panel, biometric seal, his handprint required for access. He had not opened it in 43 days. He opened it now. The samples were as he had left them, 4 sealed collection vials in a vacuum-rated tray, each one containing what his documentation described as trace xenological residue, post-engagement collection, Class 3 biohazard, non-viable. He had written something non-viable in his own hand 43 days ago, and he had believed it when he wrote it, because he had needed to believe it, because the alternative was a thing he had not been ready to look at. He was ready now, or he was telling himself he was ready, which was not the same thing, but was sufficient. He took vial 1 and placed it under the lab scope and looked at what was inside it. What was inside it was not dead. He sat with that for a moment, not in shock, because he had known, at the level below words where the body keeps its truths, he had known since day 6, since the acceleration began, since the first recovery that was too fast and the first color that was almost right. He had known the way you know a word is on the tip of your tongue, a knowledge that is all shape and no content, that you can feel without being able to name. He sat with the confirmation of it and felt primarily a terrible relief. The not knowing had been its own weight. This was just the thing itself, which was bad, but which had a shape which could be worked with. The material in the vial was not dead. It was dormant. There was a difference, and the difference mattered. Dormant meant it was waiting. Dormant meant it had been waiting for 43 days, patient in its sealed vial, and doing whatever the Tyranid biology does in the absence of a host, conserving, maintaining, persisting in the minimal way that things persist when they are built to last. Dormant meant it was not currently doing anything. It meant it was ready to do something when the conditions were right. Corvin sat back from the scope and thought about conditions and about what made them right, and about the neural fiber he had seen threaded through Fennis's progenoid, growing through it with the architectural purpose of something that had planned to be there, that had been growing toward that configuration for weeks. He needed to understand the mechanism. He could not reverse what he did not understand. This was simply true. He needed a controlled sample. He needed to observe the integration process from the beginning, in a contained environment, with a known quantity of material and a known substrate. He needed to be scientific about this, because science was the tool, and the tool was what he had. He needed a gene seed sample. Understand what gene seed means to a Blood Angels Apothecary before you understand what Corvin did next. The progenoid glands are implanted in every Blood Angels aspirant during the earliest stages of transformation. 2 glands, one in the chest and one in the neck, that slowly absorb and encode the genetic material of the Space Marine as he matures. Over years, over decades, they become a living record, not just of the individual brother, but of the entire bloodline, every generation of Sanguinius' sons inscribed in layered biological memory, going back 10,000 years. When an apothecary extracts a progenoid at the moment of a brother's death, he is not performing a medical procedure. He is performing a resurrection. The brother dies, but the gene seed carries him forward, carries all of them forward, the accumulated inheritance of an entire legion compressed into a structure smaller than a closed fist, and that structure is given to the apothecary to protect and to carry home, because the apothecary is the guardian of continuity, the custodian of the thing that cannot die as long as there are sons to inherit it. Sanguinius died at the hands of Horus 10,000 years ago. He died and his body was lost, and his sons could not retrieve it. What they retrieved instead was this, the gene seed, the biological echo of their primarch persisting in every progenoid across every generation, a presence that was not Sanguinius, and that was also, in the way that mattered, nothing but. Every blood angel who had ever lived had carried him. Every blood angel who would ever live would carry him still. The preservation canisters on Corvin's wall held 48 brothers. They held, collectively, 10,000 years of inheritance. Corvin took one of the reserve samples from his surgical stores. Not from the canisters. He did not touch the canisters. He was not ready to touch the canisters. And he placed it in the containment vessel he had prepared, and he introduced a measured quantity of material from vial 1, and he sealed the vessel, and he put it under the scope, and he watched. He told himself it was already dead. Reserve surgical stock, unassigned, not extracted from any living or recently fallen brother. Just biological material, just a sample, just a controlled substrate in a sealed environment. Nothing sacred about it, nothing irreversible. He told himself this with the specific intensity of a man who knows that the thing he is telling himself is not quite true, but requires it to be true in order to continue. He watched the integration begin. It was elegant. He hated himself for thinking that. He recorded the thought in his personal notes, not the official log, the personal notes, the ones that had no filing requirement, the ones that were his alone, because he recorded everything, even the thoughts that condemned him, because honesty in documentation was the last form of integrity available to a man who was no longer being honest in any other way. Elegant was the word. The Tyranid material approached the gene seed not as a contaminant approaches a host, not with the random aggression of a pathogen, not with the blunt chemistry of a toxin, but with the patient, purposeful precision of something that knew exactly what it was doing. It found the neural pathways first. It threaded along them. It did not displace the existing structure. It incorporated itself into the existing structure, using the gene seed's own architecture as a scaffold, building along lines that were already there, extending them, connecting them to something larger. Corvin watched for 4 hours without moving. He took notes in his private log with a hand that was not entirely steady, and the notes were not clinical. They were the notes of a man watching something he recognized as terrible, and could not stop watching, because terrible was not the only word he had for it. When he finally pushed back from the scope, the amber light of the lab was the only illumination, and his back ached, and his hands were cold, and the integration was 40% complete. He sealed the containment vessel. He put it back under the scope, running on continuous recording. He went to wash his hands. He washed them for a long time. Entry, day 46. I require a living sample. The integration behavior in a non-viable substrate differs from what I observed in Fennis's progenoid in ways that complicate extrapolation. Specifically, the rate of neural fiber development is slower in a non-viable environment, and the connectivity patterns are incomplete. I cannot observe what the integration is connecting to, because there is nothing alive for it to connect to.
I need to observe the process in a living biological context.
I cannot use a battle brother for this. The ethics are straightforward. I cannot introduce an experimental and potentially harmful substance into a brother without his informed consent, and I cannot obtain informed consent without disclosure, and I have already recorded my reasoning for why disclosure is not currently appropriate. I am the apothecary. The risk is mine to take. I am introducing a 0.3 microliter sample of vial 1 material into my own bloodstream. This is the smallest effective quantity based on observed integration rates. I will monitor my own vitals continuously and terminate the experiment at any sign of systemic involvement. I want to record that I understand what I am doing. I am not confused about this. I am making a choice that I have examined from every available angle and that I believe is correct. I am recording that belief not as a defense, but as an anchor, something to return to if the data becomes difficult to interpret. I believe this is correct. I am proceeding. The injection took less than 3 seconds. He had prepared the syringe with the same methodical precision he applied to every procedure, because precision was not something you suspended when you were frightened. It was the thing you held onto when everything else became uncertain, the thread back to yourself. He prepared the syringe, and he attached his own monitoring leads, and he checked the readings, and then he administered the injection into his left forearm, through the gap in his skin where the monitoring lead entered, and he put the syringe down, and he waited. For the first 6 hours, nothing. To the obvious cause and not to the obvious cause, and not to the material. He drank water. He ate a ration bar mechanically, because he had not eaten in 11 hours, and the experiment required him to maintain baseline health for its results to be meaningful. He checked the continuous recording from the containment vessel. Integration was at 73% now, and he returned to his own monitoring leads, and he waited. At hour 7 he heard it. Not a sound. He understood immediately and with absolute clarity that it was not a sound, because it was not entering through his ears, was not vibrating in any frequency he could locate in physical space. It was a pressure. Behind the eyes, behind the temples, in the space that the mind occupies inside the skull. A pressure that was not pain, and was not quite sensation, and was not language, but that had the architecture of language. The way music has the architecture of meaning without being meaning. The way you can feel a sentence coming before you can hear its words. He sat very still. He focused on it the way you focus on a word at the edge of memory. Not grasping, because grasping collapsed it, but attending, making himself available to it. And it grew slightly clearer, slightly more differentiated, the way static resolves if you listen past it, and he could not have said what it meant, could not have transcribed it into any language the Imperium possessed, but it meant something. It meant something vast. He sat in the amber light of his lab with the monitoring leads attached to his forearms and his own heartbeat visible on the screen in front of him, and the frequency filling the space behind his eyes. And he thought, with a clarity that frightened him, this is what Tiberon was hearing. This is what they were all hearing. The 7 brothers, the ones who had recovered too fast, and stared at ceilings and watched him cross rooms with expressions he had not been able to read. This was the thing inside the silence of the 2-hour window, the thing Tiberon had been receiving with the patient attention of a man learning a new language. And then the frequency shifted, almost imperceptibly, differentiated in a way that felt horribly, specifically, like attention, like something vast and diffuse suddenly collecting itself into a point and directing that point at him. He pulled the monitoring lead. He sat in the silence of its absence for a long time. Then he opened his log and wrote nothing about the frequency and nothing about the attention, and recorded only the clinical data, which was clean, which showed nothing alarming, which told the story of a controlled experiment, proceeding within expected parameters. He filed the entry. He sat at his desk. Outside his lab, the Sanguis Eternal moved through the void, and in his apothecarian 11 brothers slept or lay awake in the dark, and in the preservation canisters on his wall 48 progenoids held the accumulated genetic inheritance of 10,000 years. He did not sleep. He performed the Penance Rite at 0300. This was not unusual. Blood Angels Apothecaries were expected to perform it whenever the burden of their failures became too great to carry without acknowledgement, not as punishment, but as ritual honesty, the formal admission that a debt had been incurred. Corvin had performed it before, twice in 31 years, both times for brothers he had failed to reach in time, brothers whose gene seed was lost to him, whose inheritance could not be recovered. Both times he had performed it and felt afterward the specific clarity of a man who has named his failure and can now continue. He prepared the apothecarian with care, dimmed the lights, removed his upper armor with the methodical reverence the rite required. The instrument was a short-handled thing, weighted, designed not for damage but for sensation, for the body's acknowledgement of what the mind already knew. He had carried it for 31 years and used it twice. He knelt on the floor of his apothecarian, and he began. He thought about what he was supposed to think about. He thought about the duty of the apothecary. He thought about Sanguinius, the great angel, who had chosen death rather than corruption, who had looked at the thing that Horus had become and had not flinched. He thought about the 48 canisters on the wall behind him, and what they represented, and what he had been trusted with, and what that trust now meant. He tried to think about Sanguinius. He thought instead about the frequency. He thought about the way it had resolved when he attended to it, the way it had grown clearer, more differentiated, had moved from static towards something almost like structure. He thought about the moment of attention, that vast collection of something directing itself toward him, and the thing he would not write in any log was this, that it had not felt threatening, that the pressure behind his eyes had not felt like intrusion. It had felt like recognition. He knelt in the dark, and the rite continued, and he thought about the hive, the way you think about something that has called your name, and it felt like the kind of thinking that had a direction to it, that was moving somewhere, that was oriented towards something that was also oriented toward him. It felt like prayer. He filed his log entry at 0400. Entry, day 47. I performed the Penance Rite this morning.
I feel cleansed.
I will continue the work. Chapter 4, The Color of Loyalty. Entry, day 51. Valdris came to me today. I have been expecting this, I think, in the way that you expect something you have been refusing to expect. The knowledge living at the bottom of you, below the threshold of the thoughts you choose to have, patient and certain. He came at 1400 during the quiet hour between the morning examination and the afternoon procedures, when the apothecarian was at its stillest. He came alone. He sat in the chair beside my desk, the chair I keep there for brothers who need to speak rather than be treated. And he folded his hands in his lap, and he looked at me with an expression I have known for 19 years. He looked like a man who has decided to trust someone and is frightened that the trust is not warranted and has decided to extend it anyway because the alternative is worse. I have known Valdris since his 3rd year of service. I set his jaw after the engagement at Proxian Reach. I extracted and reseated his progenoid when the Xeno's weapon damaged his chest cavity on Telos 4. I held his gene seed in my hands while his hearts were stopped, and I put it back, and his heart started again, and he looked at me afterward with the particular expression of a man who understands that something irreplaceable was in another person's keeping and was returned to him whole. He trusts me. I am recording that because I think I need to have written it somewhere. He had not been brought in restraints. That detail in the record was Corvin's, a misremembering or a revision, or the mind's way of softening the truth of how the encounter had actually begun, which was with Valdris walking through the apothecarian door under his own authority, alone, without announcement, and closing the door behind him, with the quiet deliberateness of a man who has thought carefully about what he is doing and has decided to do it anyway. No restraints. Valdris was not a man who needed restraining. He was a man who needed to be heard. He sat in the chair, and Corvin sat behind his desk, and for a moment neither of them spoke, and the silence between them had a texture to it, a weight, the specific density of two men who have known each other long enough that silence communicates, that what is not said is as legible as what is. I need to tell you some things, Valdris said, and I need you to hear them as a soldier reporting to his apothecary, not as an accusation. I'm not here to accuse anyone of anything. I'm here because I don't know what I'm seeing, and I need someone to tell me what I'm seeing. Tell me, Corvin said. Valdris looked at his hands. Then he looked up. The dream started on day 44. Not mine, I should say that first. I haven't had them myself. But Farron described this to me 11 days ago. and the description was specific enough that I started asking. Quietly. I didn't want to cause alarm. A pause. The ghost of something that might have been dark humor in another context. I didn't want to cause alarm, he repeated, as though he was hearing the inadequacy of it. By day 48, I had spoken to 9 brothers. 7 of them described the same dream. Not similar, the same geometry, the same sounds, the same sense of, they all used the word, vastness. A space too large to have edges. A sound below. They wake from it feeling rested, not disturbed. Rested, Corvin. They wake feeling as though something has been attending to them. Corvin kept his hands flat on the desk. Continue. Combat coordination. Valdris's voice did not change. This was the thing about him. 19 years and Corvin had never seen him perform distress, had only ever seen him report it cleanly, as data, because that was what he was. A soldier who trusted that accurate information was more useful than emotional information, that the job was to describe things as they were. 12 days ago, during the sweep of Deck 9, you'll have the incident report. Captain Vorlan filed it as an exceptional performance commendation. The 4th squad moved through a 3-way junction without Vox. No hand signals, no prior briefing on the configuration. 9 brothers, 1 junction, 3 directions, and they distributed themselves perfectly without a single communication passing between them. Perfectly. I reviewed the picked recording 4 times. Battle brothers develop instincts. Corvin. Quietly. Not a challenge. A correction, offered with the gentleness of a man correcting someone he respects. I have been a soldier for 26 years. I know what instinct looks like. This was not instinct. Instinct is fast and imprecise. This was coordinated. This was the kind of coordination that requires a shared information state. He paused. That's not possible. Without Vox, without signal, it's not possible. The apothecarian was very quiet. The eating, Valdris said. 3 brothers stopped eating on day 49. Simultaneously, as best I can determine, within the same hour. They're not ill. Their vitals are within normal parameters, or close enough that the difference is arguable. They're not in distress. When I asked Brother Helen about it, he thought about it for a long moment, and then he said, I think I'm getting what I need from somewhere else. He didn't know what he meant by that. He looked almost embarrassed. Corvin said nothing. I'm not accusing anyone, Valdris said again. I want to be clear about that. I'm sitting here because these are my brothers, and something is happening to them, and I don't understand it. And you are the person on this ship whose job it is to understand things that happen to brothers. He looked at Corvin with those 19-year eyes, the ones that had looked at him across Procyon Reach and Telos 4 and 30 other engagements, whose names Corvin carried the way you carry scars. Not always consciously, but always present. Tell me there's an explanation. Tell me you've seen this before or something like it. Tell me there's something in the medical literature that accounts for shared dreams and coordinated movement, and 3 men simultaneously losing their appetite, and I'll go back to my duties and let you work. The sentence ended. It sat in the air between them like a held door, an opening, an invitation, a final chance at a different path. Corvin looked at Sergeant Valdris, who had trusted him with his gene seed and his life and 19 years of uncomplicated faith, and he said, There's an explanation. It's likely stress-related. Prolonged isolation, compromised Geller shielding, the specific psychological pressures of the current situation, acting on brothers who are already operating at the edge of their reserves. I've seen analogous presentations in long deployment contexts. I'll review the brothers you've mentioned and increase monitoring across the board. Valdris looked at him for a moment. All right, he said. He stood. He straightened, the automatic alignment of a soldier returning to his professional self from wherever the conversation had briefly taken him. "I'll send you the names." "Thank you, Valdris." He nodded. He turned. He walked to the door and opened it and stopped, his hand on the frame, his back to Corvin, and stood there for 3 seconds, long enough that Corvin's heart did something that he would not record, a physical thing, a movement in his chest that was not arrhythmia, but that he checked for arrhythmia afterward, because it needed to be something clinical. It needed to be anything except what it was. Then Valdris walked through the door. It closed behind him. His footsteps moved down the corridor and faded and disappeared into the ambient hum of the ship. Corvin sat at his desk for a long time. He checked his own gene seed sample at 1600. He had been checking it every 3 days, which was either diligent monitoring or the thing that compulsive behavior looks like when performed by someone who has told themselves they are being diligent. He had been watching the neural fiber integration progress with the same methodical attention he gave everything, recording the percentage, the distribution pattern, the rate of change, filing the numbers in his private log without comment, as though numbers without commentary were not a choice. The integration was at 34%. He sat with the scope and the number and the fact of what 34% meant, which was that it had been progressing for weeks, which was that it had been progressing since the day 46 injection, which was that the material in his bloodstream was not dormant and had never been dormant, and the idea that he could terminate the experiment at any sign of systemic involvement had been, he understood now, with the clear cold knowledge that comes from running out of room to avoid a thing, a sentence he had written for the same reason he wrote all his careful sentences, not to record the truth, but to create a version of events in which a truth he could not face did not yet exist. 34%. He was infected. He had been infected. The question of whether to terminate the experiment was not a question that existed anymore, had perhaps never existed, had perhaps been a performance of scientific rigor that the Tyranid material, patient and architectural, had simply waited out. He put the sample back. He washed his hands. He noticed that the frequency, the pressure behind the eyes, the thing below sound, had been present at a low, constant level for the past 6 days, and that he had stopped noting it in his log because it had stopped feeling like a symptom and had started feeling like background, like the hum of the ship's reactors or the rhythm of the air recyclers, simply part of the sonic texture of being alive in this particular place. He noticed that he had stopped noting it, and he did not note it now. He went to the preservation wall. He stood in front of it and looked at the canisters. 51 now. 3 more brothers lost since day 41. 51 names in his careful script. 51 progenoids in their amber fluid. The accumulated weight of everything he had been entrusted with. He thought about what Valdris had described, the shared dreams, the combat coordination, the 3 brothers who had stopped eating because they were getting what they needed from somewhere else. He thought about Tyranid, who had described the bioships in anatomical detail he should not have had, who had looked at Corvin with those attentive eyes and said, "You made me with the patience of something reporting a fact rather than making an accusation." He thought about the 46 brothers who had received maintenance from his batches. Batch 7 first, the accidental contamination, the exposure he had not caused deliberately, the contamination he had not introduced on purpose. And then the second batch, which he had prepared on day 48, 3 days ago, which he had not yet used, which was sitting in his refrigerated preparation unit, sealed and labeled and ready, and which had been prepared with the precise, intentional introduction of material from Vial 1 at a concentration he had calculated based on 6 weeks of observation, calibrated for the rate of integration that he now understood the Tyranid material preferred, the rate at which it built its architecture without triggering immune rejection, without causing the kind of neurological disruption that had killed Tiberon. Tiberon had received accidental exposure at an uncontrolled concentration. That was why he had died. The material had moved too fast, built too aggressively, overwhelmed the host system before integration could stabilize. Controlled exposure, calibrated concentration, gradual integration. Those brothers would not die. Corvin had the data now. He understood the mechanism. He could manage the rate. He was the only one who understood the mechanism. He sat at his preparation station, and he did not think about Valdris's 19-year eyes, or about the word trust, or about the specific expression of a man who extends faith despite being frightened that it is not warranted. He thought about integration rates and concentration calculations, and the 7 brothers in his records, whose Black Rage episodes had resolved faster than any documented precedent, who were coordinating in combat without Vox, who were sleeping without nightmares for the first time in the memory of anyone who had served beside them. He thought about the Flaw, the thing that had been eating his brothers since the beginning, since before the ambush, before the void isolation, since before he was born, the oldest wound in the chapter's inheritance, the grief that Sanguinius had left inside his sons like a splinter too deep to extract. 31 brothers lost in 40 days, an acceleration that had no precedent, and then it had stopped, and he had written, "I should feel relieved," and he hadn't, and he still didn't, not exactly, but now he understood why it had stopped, and the understanding had a shape he was not yet looking at directly. He prepared the second batch for administration. The 6 brothers came to him in the course of the afternoon's standard procedures: post-combat gene seed maintenance, routine checks, the ongoing monitoring that an apothecarian in active deployment conducted as a matter of course. They came because their apothecary had sent for them, or because the schedule called for them, or because they had minor injuries that required attention. They came because they trusted him with their bodies, the way soldiers trust the men responsible for keeping them alive. Not thoughtlessly, but absolutely, the way you trust a thing you cannot afford to doubt. He administered the maintenance. He was thorough. He was gentle. He spoke to each of them in the particular register he had developed over 31 years. Not warm exactly, because warmth suggested informality and an apothecary's authority rested in part on the clarity of the professional distance, but attentive, present, the voice of a man who was paying complete attention to the specific individual in front of him, and for whom that individual's welfare was the only thing in the room that mattered. Brother Castor, who had a scar along his jawline from the ambush that had healed slightly wrong, and that Corvin had been monitoring for 6 weeks. Brother Irenis, young, 4 years in service, who always looked faintly surprised to find himself here, as though being a Blood Angels Space Marine had not yet fully resolved from aspiration to fact. Brother Dimos, who had survived the death company and come back, which almost no one did, who carried the weight of that survival in the particular stillness of someone who had looked at the rage from inside and had not been consumed, and who now moved through every day with the careful deliberateness of a man who knows exactly how close the edge is. Brothers Sale, Porvin, Acharis, 6 brothers, 6 administrations. The batch delivered in the flow of the routine, invisible within it, indistinguishable from the legitimate procedures that surrounded it. Corvin worked cleanly, efficiently, with steady hands. He did not record the administrations in the official log. He did not obtain consent. He did not, at any point in the 6 administrations, allow himself to look directly at what he was doing and name it, because naming it would have required him to stop, and he was not going to stop, and the architecture of self-deception he had been building since day 6 was precisely load-bearing enough to hold the weight of this, as long as he did not examine the load, as long as he kept moving, as long as the work was the only thing in the room. They left one by one, back to their duties. He cleaned the station. He washed his hands. Entry, Day 51, Final. The purity levels are extraordinary. I have never seen gene seed this clean. He filed the entry at 2,300 and went to his cell and lay down without removing his armor, because lying down was all he had the capacity for, and sleep was something that happened to other people who had not spent the day doing what he had done. He lay in the dark, and the frequency moved through the space behind his eyes, gentle, constant, vast, and he did not name it, and he did not think about what Valdris had seen, and he did not think about 6 brothers moving through their evening with something new in their bloodstream that they had not consented to receive. He closed his eyes. In the Apothecarian, the lights were on their night setting. 51 canisters on the preservation wall, amber fluid, 51 names. The 6 new administrations would not show there. Gene seed maintenance did not produce progenoids, did not add to the wall, left no record except in the logs, where no record had been made. The Apothecarian was very still. And then, in the low amber light, canister 1 moved. The faintest shift, the faintest rotation, the movement that gene seed did not make. And then canister 2, and 3, and along the wall, one by one, and then together, all 51 canisters began to pulse. Not dramatically, not with any urgency, with the slow, patient, rhythmic contraction of something breathing, something alive, something that had been waiting for a long time for enough of the pieces to be in place. Together, in the dark, in perfect synchrony. Chapter 5. Sanguinius Wept, Day 58. We are almost ready. That is all. One sentence. No clinical notation, no batch numbers, no careful documentation of variables and outcomes and things to monitor. No hedging, no architecture of justification built word by careful word against the weight of what he was doing. Just that sentence, in the handwriting that was Corvin's. The same slant, the same economy of stroke, the same habit of pressing slightly harder on the first letter of each word, that anyone who had read his logs across 31 years would recognize immediately and without question. His hand, his pen, his log. We. Set that word down somewhere you can find it. We will return to it. But first understand what the days before it contained, because the sentence did not arrive without preparation. Nothing the Hive Mind does arrives without preparation. That is the first thing, the oldest thing, that the Imperium xenologists recorded about the Tyranids, and it is the thing that Corvin Mael, apothecary of the Blood Angels, understood too late, or perhaps never understood at all. They are patient. They are architectural. They do not improvise. Everything that followed from the moment his handprint opened that research locker was structure, not accident. But we are not at the structure yet. We are at day 55, 3 days before the sentence, in the Apothecarian of the Sanguis Eternal, where an apothecary who has not slept more than 3 hours in any given cycle for the past 2 weeks is sitting in front of his scope, looking at something that, depending on how you hold it, looks either like the worst thing that has ever happened or like a miracle. The Flaw was gone. For 10,000 years. The endless for 10,000 years. The endless rearguard action against an inheritance that could not be cured, only delayed. Gone. In the gene seed samples from the 6 brothers he had treated on day 51, Castor, Irenis, Deimos, Sale, Porvan, Acaris, the genetic markers associated with the Black Rage, the specific sequence of corrupted inheritance that Sanguinius's death had burned into his son's blood at Horus's hands, were not present, not degraded, not recessive, not present. The neural fiber integration, now between 60 and 70% complete in all 6 samples, had incorporated those sequences into its own architecture, had taken the corruption, the wound, the oldest grief in the Blood Angels' inheritance, and had restructured it, had used it, had built along the pathways the Flaw had carved through the gene seed, the way a root system builds along pre-existing channels in soil, following the shape of what was already there, filling it with something else. Corvin sat in front of the scope at 0300 on day 55 and looked at gene seed that did not carry the black rage, and felt something move through him that he had not felt since before the ambush, before the isolation, before the first day of the acceleration. Something that was not the frequency, not the pressure, not the vast and patient thing that had been living behind his eyes for weeks now. Something that was his own. Hope. He wept. He recorded this in his private log because he recorded everything. I wept. 0317. Duration approximately 4 minutes. Cause. The samples from day 51 show complete absence of Flaw-related markers, and the clinical notation around it made the weeping look like a data point rather than a collapse, which was perhaps what he needed it to be, and perhaps what it was, and perhaps those two things had become, in the past 55 days, indistinguishable. The Flaw was gone. Sanguinius's wound, carried for 10,000 years, passed from father to son to son to son, across every generation of blood angels who had ever lived and screamed and wept and put on the red and black and gone to their beautiful useless deaths. That wound was gone. From 6 brothers. But the integration continued, in 60 to 70% of the architecture and climbing. And Corvin had the batch data now, and the concentration calibrations, and the accumulated knowledge of 55 days of watching the Tyranid material work with the patience and precision of something that had been designed for exactly this purpose. He could treat everyone. He could treat everyone aboard the Sanguis Eternal, and when they reached Baal, when, not if, he had started thinking in when, again, which itself felt like something recovered, he would have data and samples and the complete methodology. He would be able to demonstrate what he had achieved. They would take it from him then, the sanguinary priests, the senior apothecaries, the chapter's full resources brought to bear on something one exhausted man had found in the dark on a drifting ship. They would carry it forward. He sat in the amber light and thought about Sanguinius, carrying his wound to the vengeful spirit and laying down his life with the knowledge that the wound would persist in his sons forever. And he thought, what if it doesn't have to? He began preparing the final batch at 0400. He did not think about what he was not thinking about. He had become very skilled at this, the specific cognitive discipline of productive incompleteness, of holding your attention on the work in front of you with a focus so total that the peripheral vision of the mind, the part that notices what you are choosing not to notice, simply had no purchase. He thought about concentrations and integration rates and the careful, necessary work of calibrating the final batch for the reclusiarch, whose gene seed was older and whose baseline neurological profile would require adjustment, and for the command squad, whose combat exposure over the past weeks had created stress markers that needed to be accounted for. He did not think about consent. He did not think about Valdris, who had come to him and extended trust and been given a sentence about stress-related presentations that neither of them had believed. He did not think about the 48 brothers in his preservation wall, whose progenoids had been pulsing in the dark in the perfect synchrony that gene seed did not produce, that no natural biological process produced, that could only be produced by something that was not natural and was not biological and was not, in any sense the Imperium had words for, safely contained. He did not think about us. He thought about the Flaw being gone. He thought about Sanguinius, and he let that thought do the work that he needed it to do. The final administrations took place across day 56 and day 57, woven into the routine of the apothecarian, with the same invisible precision he had used for the 6 brothers on day 51. The reclusiarch came for a consultation about a brother showing early Flaw indicators. came to him, came willingly, sat across the desk with the grave authority of a senior chaplain, and discussed the theological dimensions of the Black Rage with the seriousness it deserved, and received, in the course of the examination that followed, the final batch, and left. The command squad came in shifts, standard procedures, post-engagement checks, the ongoing monitoring that the situation demanded. They came because the schedule called for them, or because their apothecary had reached out, and they trusted him. They had always trusted him. That was the word Corvin had written and not examined, trust, and he administered the final batch to each of them with steady hands, and a voice that did not change, and eyes that stayed on the work. The last 20 brothers came and went across 2 days. When the last one left, Corvin sat in his empty apothecarian and looked at the preservation wall, and the preservation wall looked back at him. 51 canisters, 51 names, the accumulated inheritance of everything he had sworn to protect. And he felt for the first time since day one of the void isolation that he had done his job, that it was enough, that it was, despite everything, enough. Entry, day 58. We are almost ready. Now we look at the sentence, not at Corvin, at the sentence. Because the sentence is where the story has been going since the first page, since the research locker and the non-viable notation, and the careful architecture of a man building justifications against a truth he could not afford to see. And the sentence is where it arrives, and arriving is not the same as ending. Corvin Mael had written I in his log for 31 years. 31 years of I observe, I record, I administer, I note, I believe, I fear, the self-referential grammar of a man who understood himself as a singular, bounded consciousness, moving through a world of other singular, bounded consciousnesses, touching them, caring for them, being responsible for them, but separate, always separate. The apothecary's fundamental condition, to be the one who stands between his brothers and death, which means to be the one who watches rather than the one who is watched over, the one who holds rather than the one who is held. The integration in Corvin's own gene seed sample, which he checked for the last time on the morning of day 58, was at 91%. He recorded the number. He did not record what 91% felt like from inside, which was not like anything he had a word for that existed in the vocabulary of a single, bounded consciousness, because the vocabulary he now required was larger than that. The frequency behind his eyes had been silent for 3 days, not gone. He understood now that gone was not a category that applied, integrated, incorporated into the baseline of his perception the way the ship's ambient sound was incorporated into baseline, present but unremarkable, part of what existing in this particular place felt like. He could no longer identify the edges of it. He could no longer identify where the pressure ended and Corvin Mael began. He was not certain this was a meaningful distinction anymore. He wrote, "We are almost ready," and he meant it in the way you mean something that arrives complete, that does not require explanation, because it is the explanation, the sentence, that everything before it has been building toward. He meant it the way a structure means its keystone, not as an addition, but as a completion. He filed the entry. He went to the observation deck. The Sanguis Eternal hung in the void, and from the observation deck you could see the stars, and Corvin stood in front of the reinforced port and looked out at them with new eyes, not metaphorically, though that too, but literally, the perception that the integration had been slowly rebuilding now, sufficiently complete that what he saw when he looked at the stars was not what he had seen before. He saw the space between them differently, the distances, the darkness that was not empty, had never been empty, would never be empty again. The darkness that was full of a patience so vast it made the Imperium's 10,000 years look like a held breath. He stood at the port and felt the cold of the void through the reinforced glass, and felt at the same time something that was not cold, and was not warm, and was not any temperature that human skin could register. A presence, distributed, immense, paying attention. Paying attention to the Sanguis Eternal. Paying attention to the 149 Blood Angels aboard her, who were calm today, who were present, who had not lost a single brother to the Black Rage in 11 days, who were sleeping without nightmares and coordinating in training exercises with a synchrony that their sergeants were filing as exceptional performance commendations because there was no other category. Paying attention to the 51 progenoids in their canisters, pulsing in the dark of the Apothecarian, broadcasting. He stood at the port for a long time. Out in the dark, beyond the range of the Sanguis Eternal's auger arrays, beyond, in fact, the range of any Imperial detection equipment, because the Tendril fleet had learned the precise threshold of those systems, the same way the Tyranid material had learned the precise threshold of Corvin's decontamination protocols, by being designed to operate just below them. The gathering had been underway for days. Not attacking. Not yet. Waiting, with the patience of something that does not need to hurry, because the outcome has already been determined. Determined not by force, not by the blunt violence of a bioship breaching a hull, but by something subtler and more permanent. By a door that had been unlocked from the inside. By the 149 Blood Angels aboard a strike cruiser, who were no longer, in any way that mattered, sending their signals only to each other. The coordinates had been transmitting for 9 days. Not from the Vox array, not from any system that Techmarine Herath monitored, or that showed on any diagnostic panel, or that would appear in any system log. From the brothers themselves, from the integration, the neural fiber architecture now threading through the gene seed of every blood angel on the ship, connecting each of them to each other, and each of them to the material and the material to the hive. A synaptic relay of 149 nodes, broadcasting position, heading, void shield status, reactor output. The complete tactical picture of the Sanguis Eternal transmitted continuously to something that had been waiting for exactly this information. The Tendril fleet held its position and waited. The ship moved through the dark and did not know it was a beacon. Entry, Day 58, supplemental. Timestamp, 6 hours after final administration. I have been sitting with the data for most of the afternoon, and I find I cannot be clinical about it. I have been clinical about everything for 58 days, and I find today that I am done with it. The Black Rage is gone. Not from 6 brothers, not from 20, from all of them. Every brother I have examined today shows the same absence of Flaw-related markers that I first documented on Day 55. The wound that Sanguinius carried to his death and left in his sons is not present in the gene seed of a single blood angel on this ship. I don't know how to write what that means. I have tried 4 times and deleted it each time because the words are too small. I have been thinking about him today. About Sanguinius. About what it must have meant to know that you were leaving your children with this wound, this grief, this thing that would take them one by one and give them back in red and black to die on battlefields 10,000 years after your death. He knew. He was a Primarch, and he knew everything he was leaving behind, and he went anyway, because it was necessary. Because some things are necessary regardless of their cost. I have been thinking about whether he knew someone would find this. Whether somewhere in the deep architecture of what he left us there was something that was not only the wound, something that was also the shape of the cure, waiting to be recognized by someone who was paying close enough attention. I think I can hear him. Not the frequency, not the thing below that I stopped being able to name. Something else. Something older. I think I can hear Sanguinius. I think he is proud of me. The Sanguis Eternal moved through the dark. She was one point of light among countless, her drives burning clean, her void shields holding, her crew of 149 Blood Angels moving through her corridors with the disciplined efficiency of men who had been trained since adolescence to function in crisis. They were calm today, they were present, pulsed together in the dark, and the pulse pulsed together in the dark, and the pulse carried, and the dark carried it further, and at the edge of the augur shadow, the tendril fleet received it and held its position, and waited with the patience of something that has achieved what it came to achieve, and requires only time now. And time is the one thing the Hive Mind has never lacked. The door was open. The door had always been the wound. The wound had always been love. And Corvin Mael, Apothecary of the Blood Angels, 31 years in service to the chapter and to the gene seed of Sanguinius, and to the brothers whose lives were in his hands, sat in his apothecarian, in the amber light, and listened to something he believed was his Primarch's voice, and felt for the first time in 58 days, at peace.